Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Goff, and I am Principal Product Marketing here at Revenera. And I would like to welcome you to today's webcast, Planning for Software Business Success in 2023. I am very glad to be joined by my colleague, Nicole Seegerer. She's SVP and General Manager here at Revenera, and she's going to share her unique perspective and experience with us today. But before we get started, I do want to go over a few housekeeping details. First, today's discussion will be roughly 30 to 40 minutes long. And if you do have any questions or comments along the way, please just add them to the Q&A tab, and we'll try to answer them as we go along or at the end if time allows. And as always, if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you individually after the event. Finally, please be sure to check out the related materials we've provided in the handouts tab, and we'll also be sending you a link to the recording in the next 48 hours. So let's get started. So if you're joining us today, you shouldn't be too surprised that 2023 will present some challenges that we haven't seen for a while. In fact, according to IDC's Future Enterprise Resilience and Spending Survey from October 2022, 60% of respondents worldwide believe that we're already in a recession or will be by the end of 2022, and 35% believe that we'll be in a recession in the first half of 2023. And unfortunately, it's hard to read the news lately without seeing another story about layoffs or hiring freezes. So there's a lot to cover today in terms of planning for success in 2023. So Nicole, I know that here at Revenera, we like to share the bottom line up front. So let's start with some of the themes that we want to dig into today.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And we've all been in the business for a longer time, I guess at least, right? So we've seen economic ups and downs. I don't think that they are ever super scary, but they mean that we need to adjust it as businesses, right? And when we are in the software or on the technology industries, there are certain things that we can do to get through a recession and through more challenging times better. So we'll talk about plenty of them today, and we'll try to give some advice as to what software companies can do to be profitable and successful, even if they might see a little bit of softness in new sales because economic times are challenging, right? So just from a bottom line perspective, profitability is super important, especially when we are talking about recession or the climate that we are in right now, right? So there are sometimes, and we've seen that over the last few years, there was a lot of money to be spent and a lot of investment. Profitability sometimes was not as important as investment levels. That changes at the moment a recession comes in. And profitability becomes the most important thing that gets measured by C-suites. And of course, any well-run business can handle a recession much better because they have a better plan, they have a more long-term plan, and they know how to deal with it when business should indeed be soft for 1 or 2 or 3 months. And then, of course, we are in the software industry, and software business models keep changing a lot faster than business models in some other industries, right? So software companies apply new pricing and packaging models quite often, even more often when they're on the SaaS space. It can be a competitive differentiator, but then also there's just general changes as to how software is sold, and we'll talk about that later on, moving from more of a perpetual maintenance model into subscription, into usage, moving from on-premise software to SaaS. And then last but certainly not least, you'll hear an underlying theme today that understanding software usage is a key to just about everything. It's a key to understanding if your customers are happy. It's a key to understanding your renewal situation. And it's also a key to understand if you are maybe losing revenue to piracy or overuse. So getting data and making decision based on that is super important. We'll talk about all these things today and a few more, but that is the bottom line is the things that we want to discuss with you today.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. So without dwelling on it too long, I do want to dig into the economic impact a little bit more before we talk about, how suppliers should be planning to address it. So we are seeing a downturn in the market. In previous years, the software index has outperformed the S&P 500 with gains of 52% versus 16.3% in 2020. But 2022 has been especially tough for the software industry. And with company valuations dropping, it's important to mitigate that by planning accordingly. And in its worldwide IT predictions for 2023, IDC noted that we'll be in the first recession of the as-a-service economy. and that 70% of enterprise buyers say that the biggest barrier to software investment is the inability to prove business benefits rather than cost concerns. CIOs and FinOps are looking to renegotiate contracts for pricing certainty and to prioritize spending on solutions that deliver clear value. And despite those challenges, though, IDC does predict that tech spending will grow 8 times the rate of the overall economy in 2023, and that software subscription and cloud models should ensure resilience. I also want to note, for those of you who are familiar and hopefully should be familiar with our monetization monitor, in the 22 edition of that on software monetization models and strategies, we saw that only 32% of respondents feel that pricing is totally aligned with the value provided to customers. So clearly there's room for improvement there, and today's discussion should help you move things in the right direction. So Nicole, given what IDC has had to say about the importance of subscription and cloud models, can you talk a bit about the impact of models that keep changing and what that means for software suppliers, especially in challenging economic times?
Yes, absolutely. I just referred to it in the beginning, but let's dig in just a little bit deeper, right? So when we look at software business models, how software is being sold, we see, a path that a lot of software companies are on. And by the way, when I say software companies, I don't only talk about the traditional software vendor. I also talk about a lot of technology companies that are offering devices that have software on them that are sold as a service model, and so on and so on. So it goes way beyond software and basically covers the whole technology industry, maybe with the exception of just a few small niche products. Years ago, we all, and that started probably 10, 15 years ago, I can't even count the years anymore, we started moving from perpetual to subscription, right? So subscription at some point overtook the traditional perpetual and maintenance license sale because it's more valuable to the software supplier, but also it provides more product value to the software buyer. It's something that a lot of companies are well underway on, but it's also in some areas, especially in the technology device area, it's something that's still going on and that takes a little bit of time for customers to get used to. But we are also making a move from subscription to SaaS. So now SaaS is always paid as a subscription, right? So we are mixing deployment and monetization models here. But a lot of time what happens is that software companies sell on-premises software with a perpetual license and maintenance model. They then move to selling that on-premise software with a subscription model, and they then move to selling that software as a SaaS product, moving away from on-premise software. That's very often the path that companies are taking. And that gets us to the third point here, understanding how to move to SaaS. I spend a lot of my time talking to our customers and to a lot of software companies in the world, and there's hundreds that I talk to. There's almost no conversation where SaaS doesn't play a role. There's still a lot of companies that have mostly their products as on-premise software, but everyone has some sort of a SaaS strategy. It might be in a niche for just 1 or 2 products, or it might be an overall company strategy. When we do that, it's super important that we understand how we move to SaaS. And there's, of course, the technical discussion about software delivery and deployment and how we run a SaaS business and where we run it and in which cloud we put it and so on and so on. But then there's, of course, also the question of understanding how our end customers even want to use SaaS technology. When we've offered on-premise software before, what is it that we have to offer to our customers as SaaS that makes it important for them to move from on-premise to SaaS and potentially even pay more for that SaaS offering? It comes down to really understanding how the software is being used, what features are most available to customers, and so on and so on. And then, of course, as we move to SaaS, pricing and packaging get changed a lot more often than they would have changed for traditional on-premise software products. That's something that I'm seeing quite a bit in the industry. Once a company has moved their product line to SaaS, there's very often an ongoing effort to always align and tweak pricing and packaging to the newest offering. And that doesn't mean to throw over pricing and packaging completely, but it means to bring in a feature there, take out a feature there, change a price point there, bring in a new metric for a certain usage-based component there. So SaaS companies are extremely successful in tweaking their pricing and packaging so that they can adjust it with the ongoing innovation that they deliver on their products. And that's a good thing to do. However, they need to be set up for this, right? You can only do this if you even have the technology on board to change your pricing and packaging quickly. If it takes you half a year to implement these changes in your homegrown product, that might be a little bit harder to do. So you want to think about that as well. And then when companies are transitioning from on-prem to SaaS, there's one thing that goes across every company that makes that journey, right? When you're moving to SaaS, your SaaS product won't be super profitable in the beginning because you have to build up the technology, you have to onboard customers, you even have to get to economies of scale, and that doesn't happen overnight. So very often, it's the profitability of the on-premise business that determines how successful we are on our SaaS journey as technology companies. And very often it's the super profitable, widely installed on-premises software that even makes it possible for companies to move to SaaS. So that's another thing to think about as you are thinking about your business model. When you put up your SaaS strategy and you lay out your plans for the next few years, then the question is also how do we make sure that our roadmap is compelling? We can do enough so that we make it compelling to our customers. There's a very, very valuable revenue stream sitting with your on-premises business that you should not forget about. A lot of software companies, when they focus fully on SaaS, almost deprioritize some of their on-premises solutions, how they price and package them and what they do for their customers. That's not the best idea often, right? Because it can turn into customer churn and problems on the on-premise side pretty quickly. And then you're also putting your overall company profitability at risk when you're moving to SaaS. So just a few things to think about, but that story that we are seeing here on the slide is the story that every technology is going through. And then when we have the right process in place and we have the right technology to make it happen, we are putting ourselves into really a comfortable position and probably ahead of some of our competitors when we think it through in a good way. And we set ourselves up for success in the future, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, and before you mentioned product usage data, and we'll talk about it some more later too, but that can drive a lot of the decisions that we make along the spectrum that you've laid out here.
It should. No move to SaaS is just a lift and shift, right? Any company that offers an on-premise software today and then moves into SaaS will look at, okay, how do I refactor my application in a way that it makes sense for the future? Not only technically cleaning up this technical debt, taking out things that are not needed anymore, but also how do you best deliver value to your customer? If you don't know what they are using, there's just no way that you can do that based on data. But Absolutely. If you understand which features are being used and how they are being used, you're putting yourself in a very, very good position to drive a successful SaaS strategy. Back over to you, Mike.
Yep, for sure. And your points about changing business models are definitely echoed by our 2022 monetization monitor on software monetization models and strategies, which underscores that on-prem software represents the model with the highest extensive use, which we define as a model that's used for more than half of a supplier's business. So even with the growth of SaaS, which we'll get to on the next slide, it's clear that the long tail of on-prem should not be ignored. And again, when it comes to the deployment model expected to see the greatest growth, it's not a surprise that SaaS is a clear winner at 59%. But what's a little bit more interesting is when you look at on-prem, while it's expected to see the greatest decline in use at 33%, there are still 25% of respondents to our survey that expect their use of on-prem to grow. So with all the changes to deployment and monetization models, Nicole, can you talk about the impact on customers? We've already mentioned the importance of proving value of your software, and that's especially true when it comes to customer retention. And I think we've all seen this stat. The cost of customer acquisition is 5 times higher than the cost of customer retention. What are some of the things suppliers should be thinking about when it comes to retention?
Yeah, good question, Michael. First of all, I think every supplier should be thinking about their customers and how to make them successful. If that is front and center for you and how you're planning your business, and you can't get it too wrong. But then, of course, everyone who's in a software company's management team, like I am, will know that it's not only about the soft values, it's also about the hard numbers and how you deliver on those. And the most important metric for most technology companies by now is what we call ARR, annual recurring revenue, which is something that has come, if you're not familiar, a lot with the subscription move, right, where we are looking not so much as to what is that single one deal, as it was at that back in the perpetual world, but what is a customer paying us and what is the sum of our customers paying us every year. That metric is kind of the hardest metric when we measure software and technology companies, and it takes into account the renewal value. And the renewal value, as for software companies that have been around for a longer time, the renewal volume will always be much bigger than the new sales volume. It depends on your growth percentage, of course. But at some point, of course, your renewals revenue will be much higher. So retaining customers and making sure that they are successful and they close long-term subscriptions with you is the most important thing to do to run a profitable and successful software business. And in order to do that, we come back again to product usage data, right? Very often, software companies don't have a lot of insight into a single customer's usage. And I'm not talking about what exactly is that customer doing. That is up to that customer and it's none of our business. But as a software supplier, we should of course know if customers are even using our software, if they are growing the use of our software, if that is declining, right? And then when renewal time comes up and the discussion about renewal comes up or to potentially even upsell, we really shouldn't be surprised. And if we knew what that customer was using, then we won't be. But the fact of the matter is that today a lot of software companies lack that insight, and then it becomes a big question mark if a customer will renew or not. And it's basically decided upon or predicted upon based on things like relationship status, maybe number of support tickets, and so on. Those are ways to approach it. But really, when we have usage insight, it makes it a lot easier because then we would see if the customer is using as much as they are entitled to, and if that is growing or if that is declining. And then we could, based on that, at least make some more predictions and data-driven predictions about the likelihood of a renewal to come in. And then, of course, we also want to help our customers transition. We just talked about the business model transition, right? And what software companies go through to become super valuable and super modern and in SaaS and subscription consumption-based models. But it's not only a business model change for us as software companies, it's also change that we put our customers through. And change, as we all know, is not something that people always like. So it can be a little bit hard. And customers will need time to adjust. And when we just push too hard, or we don't think it through, or we don't have a clear path, you might make it very difficult for them, right? So, for example, think about how you transition your customers from maintenance plans to a subscription plan on the financial side, or when you're moving from on-premises to SaaS, right? Think about what your transition plan looks like for customers. Are you just going to force them at some point, or are you going to give them a years-long transition time? Are you giving your SaaS solution to them for a certain amount of time to just play around with and basically use on-prem or SaaS as they like? There's a lot of different ways to do it. And certainly it varies depending on your business model, which industry you are in, what type of customers you have. But it's really important to think these transition plans through, because you also get churn and uncertainty among customers when you're driving change in a way that your customers won't understand, and maybe then they won't be open to come along that journey with you. So bring them along and make sure that you think through exactly how your customers can move through, and you're not stopping them with a difficult user experience there or customer experience.
Yeah, and obviously customer retention is an area where suppliers should have the most control over how they manage that. And it's just one aspect, though, of running a profitable software business. Can you talk about some of the other aspects that suppliers should be thinking about as we move into 2023?
Absolutely. And that goes more into running the business. We talked a lot about the go-to-market, Michael, but now we are looking into, okay, how do I run the business in the back end? How do I operate a software business that is profitable and successful? And a couple of things that, of course, Revenera is also playing in that market that are important is how much can I automate my back end processes to make it simple to run the software business. Very often, especially when we are in a phase of strong growth as a software business, we try to make changes quickly, which often ends up with some disjointed processes, with some manual processes, with some homegrown, because we are all, as software companies, we love to build everything ourselves rather than buying third-party technology. And that can make it very hard to operate software businesses, software products at the back end. So just a couple of things to think about is what is your licensing? How do you make sure that only customers that are paying you get access to your software and you protect your IP? And how do you make sure that you enforce your business models and build in that when a contract ends, you only have so and so much time to still have access to the software, and so on and so on. There's a lot of bells and whistles around any effective licensing program. And it's just important to have technology in place so that you don't have to take care of any steps there manually, right? And it's also important that you have licensing on board that really works so that, again, only entitled customers can use your software. Then, of course, if you are still delivering on-premise software, and that's all on the left-hand side here about leveraging the long tail of on-premise software, if you're still delivering software, that should be automated based on the entitlement, right? So you should have a system that knows what your customer is entitled to, and then they not only have access to their licenses, but also to their software packages for download and to the software containers you might be providing to them if you've already containerized your software. They should be able to do that all in self-service so that not everything is a support ticket, but customers can just go into your end customer portal and do any transactions related to licensing or software downloads themselves. And then, of course, you should also, even for on-premises software, don't think that you'll never change pricing and packaging. It can always come up, and there needs to be a way to even do that for on-premise software. So when a new feature comes in, another feature gets taken out, that should be possible on the back end, and it shouldn't always require that you support old models forever and a day. And then, of course, you want to think about how you can run your software business most streamlined, I guess, right? So we can, of course, have a lot of different product lines that are almost developed separately, which leads to a lot of engineering teams, a lot of engineers, and probably not to the most profitable way to run. But we could also think about how can we combine and then differentiate different product lines just to switching on and off features so that this one product can do that one thing, but that other product can't, right? So there's a lot of things that software companies can do to improve there and to streamline. And it's some things that is well worth looking at because that long tail of on-premise software that we talk about here won't go away anywhere. In 10 years, we will still be talking about on-premise software, and it will still be a very, very profitable business for some software companies if run well. And that is what we are talking about here today. On the right-hand side, you just see a few metrics that we take from projects that we run with our customers, right? So implementing a good licensing technology that would help you enforce and fulfill your business models, right, can lead to 3 to 10% revenue growth, depending on what your current solution is. You'd usually get some revenue growth by understanding renewals and automating some of the processes around renewals, but then you also save money in a lot of spaces, and especially around customer self-service, electronic software delivery, the ability to fully support customers because you have exact insight into which version they are on, what they are using, and so on and so on. So a lot of things that you could do to just basically streamline your back office processes and make it easier for your operations team to run the software product in a really good way.
So let's dig into that a little bit more, Nicole, and talk about the process side of the equation, and specifically when it comes to the quote to cash process. What are some things that suppliers really need to focus on, especially as things get a little bit more challenging?
Absolutely. So one thing here, and we don't need to go very deep on that slide, but I think the most important thing is to look at the whole quote to cash process in its entirety. I alluded to it earlier on when I said when we grow, we put things together quickly, and then we've got a disjointed process or manual steps. Those manual steps are often to be found in that process you're seeing here on the screen, right? Every customer goes through that life cycle of buying software, getting quoted, signing a contract, getting the software delivered. using that software and then renewing at some point, at which point the whole cycle starts again, right? And that process should be fully automated in the background, right? So at the moment a deal closes, it should just trigger a whole process of entitling the customer to this queue, giving them access, giving them download to the software if that is a thing, starting to measure usage, and then of course starting to prepare that renewal and getting data about customer usage. We don't want to go too deep here because it's a whole topic in itself, which I believe we did webinars on as well. But the important point here to take away is that back office process from quote to cash is something that should be automated. It should be fully integrated, and it shouldn't really need a lot of manual intervention, because when it does, it's holding us back from growth. And it also inevitably creates issues where data is wrong or errors pop up.
Yeah, and of course, the key to all of this is to drive operational efficiency. So making sure you have the right systems in place to get that done. But let's drill down a little bit and talk about what that looks like.
Right. So when we think about that quote to cash process, then of course you should be asking yourself the question: what is my single system of record for each process? So it's not everything is in one system. Very often, what we see is there's a CRM system like a Salesforce, there's an entitlement management and licensing system like a Revenera, and then there might be a billing system like a NetSuite. That's a very standard setup that we see at a lot of customers. The important thing is that there's a clear definition as to what system is a single system of record, for each data, so that there's no differences there. And then to also use that system across all product lines and to not create silos between product lines, because when that is done, it duplicates the effort every time we do it. The more we standardize on a single system for our product lines and on standards that everyone can use, the more we get into economies of scale as software companies. Of course, customer self-service we talked about, and revenue recognition we talked about as well. When that whole quote to cash process is automated, then revenue recognition really is fully automated and happens within minutes after a deal closes, because it automatically triggers an email that would go out to the customer and gives them their access information. It automatically triggers a self-service portal that would give the customer access to their software downloads and documentation. And it can even be fully tied into the DevOps process when you're building and delivering containers that you're shipping to your customers or sending to your customers. And then, of course, it all saves us money and headcount on operations and support, because there's less steps that we have to do manually.
And so when we think back to what IDC had to say and what Monetization Monitor said about aligning price with value, when we think about managing use rights, that really should be invisible to end users, right? And having operational efficiency is going to get you closer to that. And then having the data insights to see what adoption looks like, engagement looks like, usage looks like, that's going to help you prove that value or address it if a particular customer is not seeing it.
Absolutely. A lot of the things that we are talking about here today are things that software and technology companies should be in the back end, to do in the back end. Your customers don't care about any of that. Your customers care about getting access to the software, being able to use it, and hopefully not being held up by not having access or by hitting any other issues, or having to put in a support ticket to just create a new user or to entitle a new division of their company, right? So that all basically means the back office process is streamlined as much as it can be, so that customers have a good experience on the front end.
Awesome. So one other area of focus that I wanted to talk about, and Nicole's going to let me chime in here because it's sort of a passion of mine, but challenging economic times, you really want to focus on compliance. And so this is a heat map, and it shows the top 20 software license misuse and piracy hotspots. And it's based on aggregate data from our compliance intelligence customers. So that's a solution that enables on-prem software providers to track and identify unpaid users of their software to convert them into paying customers. So why is this important now? Well, obviously, and hopefully it should be obvious, but during challenging economic times, there is definitely an increased risk of piracy and overuse. And our advice all the time, but especially now, is to really be proactive and take a data-driven approach to compliance. Because when you do that, now you're able to recover revenue from the unpaid use of your on-prem software. So let's sort of look at some trends. The number from BSA is a little bit old. The last time they did this report was in 2018. But when you look at that $46 billion number, they present that as a problem. But I'm very much the optimist, glass half full sort of person. Like, it's also an opportunity, and we've seen that play out with our customers over the years. Because when you can track and identify unlicensed use, you're now able to convert that into a pretty significant revenue stream. And when we look at our latest monetization monitor, we have 3 of them. They're in the resource tab. Check those out. On some software compliance and piracy, unlicensed use is a significant cause of revenue leakage. So we have 58% of respondents who cited overuse as a significant cause of revenue leakage. So that's the use of software where you're exceeding the limits of your license terms. 51% cited misuse, and that's the intentional configuration of software to enable use beyond the limits of the license. And finally, 47% cited piracy, and that's the use of software that's been configured or tampered with to remove or bypass use rights enforcement. So with unlicensed use being such a significant cause of revenue leakage, it makes even more sense now to add a proactive compliance approach to your 2023 plans. So we actually do what we believe in and do what we promote. And so I want to take a quick look at this case study to show you how this works. So Revenera's Install Shield product, it enables customers to create installers, and it's in a mature market, and it's got more than 50,000 active customers. Now, the Install Shield team was aware of the history of piracy releases and overuse and wanted to take the proactive and data-driven approach to address it that we preach. So it deployed compliance intelligence in the latest releases, and it began collecting data on unpaid use. And they began tackling piracy in this way, and it gave them some insights into how to build a compliance program that takes a softer approach and looks at it more as a sales opportunity and has an eye toward building long-term customer value. So a little bit different than a lot of people's traditional notion of how compliance works, that can be a little bit more reactive and punitive. Again, the goal of this, they're using your product, make them a good long-term customer, get that annual recurring revenue going. And again, maybe switch them to a new model. Maybe it's subscription, maybe it's SaaS. But they were encouraged by this approach to look at overuse as well. So they combined compliance intelligence data with entitlement data. And today they're seeing nearly 20% of their revenues coming from compliance programs. Now, we've got a more detailed examination of this in our November webinar on building software license compliance programs in a cloud world. But I think you'll see the value in approaching compliance this way as a way of planning for success in 2023.
Yeah, and it's Michael, if I may chime
please.
in here, right? This is our story that we've seen that Install Shield is a product that Revenera owns. It's under my management. What is true for Revenera and probably for most other software companies in the world too is that we don't have a good enough insight as to what the compliance and overuse position is. We believe that we know what that is, and we believe that we are only working with honest people. That's usually also the case, but a lot of times overuse happens unintentional. There's no bad actors. There's no one who's trying to cheat. There's just software companies that don't know that don't bring together what they've subscribed to versus what they are using. And of course, licensing can and should catch most of these things, but it cannot catch all. There's always a way around it. When there's real piracy, right? Licensing cannot catch it. That's one of the misconceptions in the industry, right? I put proper licensing into my product, I will never see any piracy. That's not really true, because piracy actually does have bad actors, right? And when bad actors work on putting licensing, going around it basically, or circumventing it, then there's nothing that licensing can do, right? If it's hacked on the application layer. So it's always good to have a multi-layered strategy where you have a proper licensing. First of all, you've got a good strategy on how you monetize your software, then you've got an effective licensing program, and then you have a compliance program to catch everything that isn't caught before. And it has been eye-opening to us what we had in terms of overuse, some piracy, but we also had overuse from use cases that weren't looked at well enough from our licensing in our licensing strategy. And I think everyone has that, right? It's a question of do you look at it, and is it valuable enough to look at it? Very often the thinking is it would only make sense for software that's high value, high price per seat. Well, in social, it isn't really high value, high price per seat, right? I would say it has a lot of value, but it's not the most expensive software in the world. But it does make a lot of sense for us to run this program, and it's something that I would quite recommend for anyone who's running software products that have been around for a longer time, because at some point they either get hacked and put into piracy places, or some customer overuse can happen just organically.
Yep, and that's actually a great segue, Nicole. As we start to wrap things up, all the things that we talked about today it's all about taking a layered approach. There are different things that you need to do very well to be successful running a software business. Would you like to wrap things up and sort of touch on some of those points and make sure everybody's got those in mind as we close?
Yes, I just quickly, I think we had a good discussion here. I hope it was useful for everyone on the line. Of course, if you want to post any questions, you could always do that. I just want to, as a manager, as a general manager of a software business with multiple product lines, I can speak from my own experience, and probably yours isn't all too different. It's always busy. There's always things going on. And of course, you want to think about roadmap, and you want to think about all the coolest, newest features and the newest strategies. And we should, right? But it does make sense, especially when we need to make sure that our software business has a long-term success, to just look at how we run our software business and if we make it profitable. All the points that you see here on the slide we've discussed today. And it's something that we should sit back and discuss and just make sure that we are on the right track. I think that's true for every management team. And I think most management teams do a great job of it. And then of course, the discussion goes further into tooling, into process, what would you have to do? But there's always ways to optimize there, to streamline the process. And sometimes we just don't turn there because we think, well, that homegrown solution that we put in place, it will hold a little bit longer. That manual process will hold a little bit longer because we rely on good people that are doing it, right? But when we wait until something breaks, it gets really difficult. It's good to look at these things proactively, because that gives the time to implement them in a good way. So just something as we close out, each quarter from a business perspective and plan our roadmap for the future. It's just something to think about, to also how to effectively run a software product line and how to make them profitable as we can, so that we can grow further.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And I think it can be overwhelming, with this economy in front of us, to get overwhelmed very easily. But I think if, as you suggest, we break things up into these different pieces and we execute very well on each piece of it, we can do a lot of work to sort of mitigate against the, oncoming challenging economic times. And speaking of planning ahead, I would like to give a quick plug. We've got a webinar coming up in February with Mark Thomason about managing software entitlement and improving operational efficiency. Ties in very well to what we've talked about here today, and Mark is a great presenter on that. If you go to the handout section, you should see your report on managing entitlements that he just released that we are happy to make available to you as well. And then, of course, the big event of Q2, Soft Summit, is coming up. We've got April 18th for EMEA and April 20th for North America. Please save your spot now. We'll be adding new speakers and highlighting that. But if you sign up now, we'll save your spot, and we'll make sure that we get you up to date on additions to the agenda as we go along. So with that, I would like to thank, of course, Nicole. Always great to have your perspective. I know you're super busy, but you bring a perspective to this discussion that really is incomparable, and that I could not do alone. So thank you. Always good to chat with you and get your perspective. And thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate your time. Please be sure to check out the materials that we've provided in the resource area, and please let us know if you have any follow-up questions. So thanks again, and have a great day. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.